Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this LegalOn Technologies and Knowable webinar. My name is Daniel Lewis. I'm the US CEO of LegalOn, and our software helps legal teams find and fix contract risks in commercial contracts with a combination of AI technology and expert legal content written by experienced attorneys. I'm really excited to be in conversation today with Nick Reed, the Senior VP of Product and R&D at Knowable. I had the pleasure of working with Nick as my co-founder of LegalOn, a legal research and analytics company we founded and led and sold to LexisNexis in 2017. Nick, thanks for joining us. Could you please introduce yourself and Knowable?
Yeah, and hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Super excited to be speaking to you about this topic that is overly near and dear to my heart. It's really all I've been thinking about for the last 10 years. And it's, fundamentally, is AI going to replace lawyers, or will it ultimately help us? As Daniel mentioned, we co-founded LegalOn together back at Stanford Law School more than 10 years ago now. And since Ravel, I continued in the legal tech space, now at Knowable. I run product, R&D, data science, and design. Knowable is the executed agreements company. What does that mean? We use both technology and a scalable human-in-the-loop process to turn contracts into data, but fundamentally, it's to help large enterprise find their contracts and know what's in them. So Daniel, that's a little bit of background. You want to tell the folks what we're going to be doing, and we'll get started?
Yeah. So before we jump in, we'll get right to the heart of the matter. I wanted to tell everybody listening, at the end of the session, we'll open up the room for about 10 minutes of Q&A. So use the Q&A icon here in the Zoom tools, add a question throughout the webinar as we go. If something is totally on point, we might even pop in and take it right then on the fly. Upvote questions that you find interesting, and we'll try our best at the end to answer as many as we can.
Cool. So
let's kick it off.
Yeah, let's kick it off. So, Daniel, you've been really operating in this kind of like tangentially related, but similar space of contracts, but focused on pre-signature. And, I haven't been able to spend nearly as much time thinking about pre-signature, kind of contract review and what's happening. Can you share a little bit with what's happening in the pre-signature contract review world? How and where is AI playing a role, and where do you think we're headed?
Yeah, so by pre-signature, when we talk about that at LegalOn, what we really mean is the stage of a contract process where a lawyer or a contract manager is sitting down with the contract that the business is negotiating before it's signed. And so their job at that moment is to review that contract, identify risks, allocate those risks between the two parties, figure out how much leverage they have, what things are actually important in the contract, make changes as needed to meet their business's needs and their risk preferences. So traditionally, that work done by legal teams has been manual. And while that's thorough, it can also be slow. It's expensive typically. It can be prone to human error, especially with high volumes of contracts or complex contracts. And so companies are rarely satisfied with the status quo, I think we can say. We talk with lots of companies now, and almost all of them are expressing pain around this contract review problem. But essentially, they've lacked a software tool, a set of technology tools to provide an alternative. Even though they value the importance of accuracy in legal reviews, they're very interested in making improvements to that process. So what AI does is AI tools like LegalOn hold the promise in contract review for faster speeds, greater consistency across a team where everybody's reviewing in the same way, handling risks in the same way, as well as scalability, being able to do more with less, handle more contracts with fewer people or with different skill sets. So while the AI technology today does not offer the same nuanced understanding of a seasoned attorney, let's be clear about that. The software can review limitless numbers of contracts quickly, 24/7, any time of day. Software can help identify potential issues, and software like LegalOn can offer supportive guidance, providing language and advice about how to handle particular issues that come up in a contract. And so the proposition of these tools, these AI tools in contract review, is centered on efficiency and on quality improvement. Where we're headed is that's kind of right where we are today. Where we're headed is that as the AI that underpins tools like LegalOn improves, capabilities expand. And so what starts as a tool that maybe folks are comfortable using for initial first pass reviews or for high volume, relatively low complexity contracts can evolve to handle more complex contracts, more tasks. So I think what we're going to see is continued advancement in the levels of nuance of these tools and what they can handle, flexibility for more complex agreements, and potentially flexibility for more industry-specific awareness and contracting norms. I think traditionalists, those at sort of the late adopting end of the spectrum for technology, they might dismiss AI tools today as inferior or inadequate for the nuanced world of contract review. But I think what we're already seeing from the thousands of adopters of LegalOn is meaningful, substantial improvements in operational costs, turnaround times, and in feeling like the quality of their work is improving. So I do think the tools are at a point where they're providing meaningful and significant value, and I expect that to continue to expand in their versatility and their capabilities looking ahead. So, I mean, just to close on this, and then I want to turn it back to hear about the post-signature side of the world. But in pre-sig, generally, teams are not looking for the business terms like cost or the length of the contract or net payment. Those are part of the review, but they're not necessarily the focus of the review. Instead, they're looking more for the legalese, for the risk balancing and that risk allocation. What's the scope of definition of confidential information? What are the exceptions on the limits to liability? What key language might be missing or should be deleted? So that's kind of where we focus and where the AI technology needs to be really strong at identifying those sorts of provision level legal issues, which is in part, I think, maybe a transition point to where you guys now step in. So how has the role of AI in post-signature contract management changed, and where are we heading there?
Yeah, it's funny, Daniel, you said a couple things that kind of like really stood out to me when you were talking about pre-sig, but to just kind of paint the picture of where Knowable is, as you said, so we're the executed agreement company. That means we deal in signed, so as you called it, post-signature contracts. So once a contract or an agreement, more importantly, has been signed by both parties, and is kind of executed, officially capturing the legal rights and obligations between two parties, two companies. Those are the documents that come to us. And the kinds of activities that attorneys are interested in post-signature contracts are actually quite different from the ones you were talking about in pre-signature. But before I hop into that, you had said something that was kind of funny to me, because you're talking about how, attorneys are coming to trust the technology more and more. And there's a lot of skepticism out there, and certainly in kind of the late adopters. But it made me think back, Daniel, when we pitched our first law firm together, like 2013 or 2014, about Ravel. And I remember this one partner in the room was like, oh, that's a really cool idea, guys. But there's two problems. One, you're never going to be able to build this. And two, lawyers are never going to use it. I like to think we proved them wrong over the years, but it took a lot of hard work. And what we were doing there was a really pointed use case. It was a whole lot of hard work to develop data from legal documents that was, I would call it kind of from a trending perspective, really valuable data. So, if we could tell you that 70% of the time a judge would likely rule a certain way or not, that was really helpful directional information for attorneys to use. And I use that as a segue to contracts, because although that's the kind of information that sometimes might be helpful for you to know that generally this may exist in your contracts or not, the reality is when you're answering a really complex question, you need really, really accurate data as an attorney. So for those of you that don't know, Knowable was actually born out of Axiom. Knowable was a business offering, a kind of business line, a service offering that had been built with pretty much humans. So a ton of human review, this is kind of 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago, reviewing contracts and then turning those contracts, instead of going, from a whole bunch of contracts to a shorter but still long, complicated legal document, they turn those contracts into data using spreadsheets, eventually, things like Power BI or Tableau to make it more interactive. But at the end of the day, it was really human generated data by reviewing all of these contracts. And the things that you said, Daniel, the pain points there is that it's slow, it's expensive, but it was really, really accurate and clients could completely rely on it. So the idea was, how do we incorporate technology? How do we use AI to make those humans to get that same kind of accuracy and quality, but do it faster and potentially cheaper? So that's, what we're really seeing there. There's kind of two trends in the post-execution contract world today. There's project-based work, what I'd call, and then there's kind of the day-to-day necessary work of knowing what's in your contracts, finding contracts, being able to rely on the data so that you can take action therefrom. And I think, there's a role for technology in both worlds. On the project-based side of things, it could very well be that if you're doing an M&A project, for example, and it's kind of what you were talking about, like maybe it's really like, maybe your M&A project is really short duration and you've got a lot to review and you just need to have a good enough answer and you're willing to take on a lot of risk while you're doing that. I think one of the guys in corporate development, you and I both know, had told us that when he was on the deal team at eBay and they bought, I think it was DoubleClick, they had like a weekend to do $1 billion or more transaction. There was no way they were going to review all of the company's contracts in that amount of time. You're not going to feasibly do it. And so, this is before there were any kind of tools to help them. And maybe in that kind of situation, I'd say definitely in that situation, it would be useful to have a tool that could give you a lot of trending information, roughly how many assignment provisions are in these things. Tell me these kind of big picture ideas so I can target and focus on the most material contracts potentially and know, the risk, kind of minimize the risk by knowing more. In day-to-day contract management, what we're hearing from our clients is it's really different. When you need to know, not just, on a day-to-day basis, it really doesn't matter how many of your contracts exactly have an assignment provision. What you need to know is, can I find the current contract that we have with X company? Do I have all the agreements that together make up, what we call kind of like that family? So, a contract is rarely one document. Most of the time, it's a whole bunch of documents. And the first task that people need to do is put them all together, see the contract, and then understand how, when that contract has evolved over time, what's happened, what's changed. And they need it to be really, really granular and accurate at that kind of capital C contract family level. So what can AI help us do? AI can help in all the steps in there, up to the last moment where you need human interaction to verify that everything's actually really, really high quality. But we can start to guess at putting contract families together. We can find a lot of entities and key provisions. We can find entity names. We can find key dates. We're constantly making our process faster and faster, which is super important. And that's all the AI assistance, and complementing it, with kind of the necessary expertise of a lawyer to verify that things are right so that our clients can go in, rely on the product and make decisions. And I think that's, the one thing, Daniel, that pre-sig and post-sig really have in common is we want to help attorneys get to action faster, right? Like the idea is, you've got all this stuff on your plate. You're really busy. This is all really daunting. How can we get you to the point where you can take the action that you're getting paid for much more quickly and with, kind of the reliability that you're going to do it right? So that's the post-sig world. When you're, one of the things that is really interesting to me right now, and that is, comes up time and time in conversations, especially as the world has changed so quickly in the last 6 months, is it's not just, are you using AI, but it's what kind of AI are you using? We went from a world of kind of traditional AI where we use things like natural language processing and machine learning to find all these things in documents. And then, November came, GPT said hello to the world. And since then, there's been a new large language model or some kind of new generative AI. It feels like every other week there's a new announcement of a company, not just using generative AI, but using it on contracts. What, I'm interested to kind of hear that, like in your world right now, what do people think about generative AI? Is it exciting? Is it frightening? Do people understand the differences that like AI is this really big field with lots of different tools in it?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think, you and I, having worked in the space for the last 10 plus years, we'd seen the steady improvement in capabilities of what traditional machine learning could do. And I think we had both been very bullish about the next 5 years and the next 10 years, right? I just got an email a couple of days ago from an attorney I'd been speaking with a year or so ago. And she, it makes me blush a little bit, but she was like, all those things you were talking about a year ago have now come true. It's amazing. But I think to be honest, even the capabilities of GPT have caught all of us by surprise. I think they caught the creators by surprise. What stands out to me of the capabilities of generative AI are things like its ability to summarize text, its ability to revise or rewrite. Now, I'm not talking so much drafting from scratch. It can do that. In the legal context, I think there's lots of important caveats about how well it does that. But it can revise and rewrite really interestingly. And we've taken advantage of that in LegalOn. And perhaps even most significant, you can converse with it in plain English. You can do multi-step interrogation. You could say, hey, summarize this contract. Tell me more about this provision. Tell me more about, circumstances under which this might arise, right? So you can have this multi-step interaction, which is really different than how people have been able to interact with machine learning in the past. The things that we got really good at with Ravel and what we'd seen progress over the years was the ability to extract information and, spot the name of a company, spot the dollar value, optimize a process by which you might predict which contracts are related to each other, that sort of thing, right? But it wasn't necessarily interactive. It was all behind the scenes. It was something that the company would do, roll out to a user, and it was sort of invisible to the user how it worked. And I think generative AI has done two things. One, its set of capabilities are new and different than traditional machine learning, like the ability to summarize and revise and draft. Those are different capabilities, but also the way that you interact with it has really changed, I think, people's perception and generated so much positive interest in AI today and what it can do that I think in general, there's plenty of noise about it. There's plenty of problems. There's plenty of important caveats to be made, but the fact that folks are leaning in saying, wow, there might now be a solution to this problem that I've been struggling with for the last 20 years, that's a great thing. I mean, that's a really exciting development because it just opens people's eyes to the fact that the software has caught up to some of these very, very difficult problems. What are you saying?
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting conversations I feel like I'm having, certainly with clients and prospective clients, is it's still back to the same thing. And I feel like it was one of the first presentations we gave in like 2015 or 2014. And it's like, what is AI? Because the reality is that definition it's really broad, and what it does is changing rapidly. But I always think back to Adam Pingle, Daniel, one of the kind of early engineers that we worked with that had been really thoughtful in the space, would always say, the funny thing about AI is, in computer science, we've been teaching about this, like basically exactly what's happening since the 1960s. Like everyone always knew these things would be possible. The question was just, when would the cloud exist? When would compute be cheap enough? When would you have the storage capacities, the training capacities to make these things work? But the kind of notions behind what we're doing from a purely engineering perspective aren't nearly as new as it feels like to all of us on the end user side. So when I kind of think about that, and I think about what's exciting about what's happening right now, I kind of double down on what you say. It's that we used to always say the best AI and ML is AI and ML that you have no idea that's behind your product, right? It's like, it's there, it's doing all this stuff, but like ultimately it's generating something for you that's useful and usable, and it's helping you do the next thing that you need to do. With generative AI, it starts to change a little bit, because I think it's very in your face that you're talking to some kind of a large language model and it's talking back to you. So this notion that it's kind of behind the scenes ML isn't as important anymore. And I think we as humans need to figure out a little bit about like what does that mean for us, because we're going to now be interacting more directly with AI, even if all these tools we've been using had it, we just didn't know it. But I think that's a really exciting opportunity. And one kind of paradigm shift I think about is we've had to learn how to interact with technology and what they'll look back on like 20 years from now in this like, Fred Flintstone's kind of way, like the way we go into search in Google, or we've been taught to do as lawyers with Boolean and all these complex techniques, is a really foreign way to interact with technology, to find things and do things. And generative AI presents this really exciting, more human way where you can ask the question that you want to ask. It's like we have this one client who always tells me, Nick, when you're coming and doing a demo, do it. He used to say like a Siri commercial. He probably today would say like a GPT commercial, but he would say like, I want to say like, hey, Knowable, answer X question. So we might go in and say like, hey, Knowable, can I find the most recent active contract that I have with this company that has this kind of a provision in it, because I need to go do something with it. But today that means you put in a search query, you put on some filters. We've all kind of learned that. I'm super excited for the day where someone is just going to be able to come in to the application and say like, hey, Knowable, I'm looking for this. Can you help me find it? And what's exciting is I don't think we're really far away from that. The other things that you said, I also think generative AI, is going to make certain kinds of traditional machine learning just better. We've been experimenting a lot with certain kinds of entity identification, things like company names. There are lots of ways that people write company names in a contract. Humans have a lot of discretion. Like even the most simple things, humans take a lot of discretion and do it really differently, which is a challenge for traditional ML sometimes. But generative AI, because it's read the entire internet and then some, knows the difference between Disney Inc. and, or knows that Marvel is part of Disney. And so you can find Marvel in a contract and associate that to a Disney contract potentially really accurately and with a lot of confidence. The other thing that we're kind of interested in, and you might be dabbling in this more than we are, Daniel, because we really focus on helping companies understand what's in their contracts, not so much on doing something to those contracts or taking an additional step. But we are getting interested in the opportunity with generative AI to not write entire contracts, but write, I would say, kind of like small contracts, like things like a renewal letter, maybe even a termination letter, but things where it doesn't need a ton of prose and it could be triggered off of what's already in that database. I think that's a really exciting space, with the huge caveat that you have to get it right. So I'm kind of wondering, as you're looking at these and you're thinking a lot about like, how do we use this to help someone draft a new, change a paragraph, draft a new paragraph, insert a sentence? Where's the trade-offs? Like, what are the limitations you're seeing between doing something pretty cool and helpful, but the risk of not getting it right when you do that?
Yeah, so in the pre-signature review, right, it's all about, in some ways, issue spotting. You want to be able to quickly say, what are the potential problems with this contract, and then make business decisions essentially of like, do I want to bother making a fix? Is it important enough that I want to make a fix? If I try to make this fix, will the other side agree to it? So there's a lot of judgment that then is wrapped up into what do you do once you've spotted the issue, but it starts with issue spotting. And so what we start with in trying to jumpstart that process from a software perspective is we'll build a framework essentially that says in any particular contract, whether it's an NDA or an MSA or a SaaS agreement, we have our legal team essentially create the framework for what a great review would look like. Here's the hundreds of issues that we would look for as an in-house team of experienced practitioners. These are the kinds of things that we would look for when reviewing this type of contract, tailored to whatever side of the agreement you're on. Are you the seller? Are you the buyer? Are you the discloser, the recipient? That sort of thing. So we'll create that framework. We're going to look for several hundred potential issues, each tailored to the contract type and the contract position that you have. Even still, though, like compared to a seasoned attorney, there will be things that that framework and that software doesn't spot that might be based in the nuances of language or in preferences. So it could be something deal specific, right? That only the two parties contracting would ever know is actually important, whether that's a disclosure of some unique piece of information or some technical point, or a limitation of liability change that's really unusual given the transaction that's happening. Or it could be something more subtle, like a business really has a strong preference around, saying best efforts versus commercially reasonable efforts or something like that. So there's certainly a level of nuance that a seasoned attorney in the driver's seat at that business would be able to handle that software doesn't. And in some ways, it's kind of hard to imagine fully automating that level of nuance, although maybe we can get there with time. So that's one of the current limitations today. We can do a lot. We can do a lot to say, hey, this is now a lot easier. We're going to help highlight the most important things, but it doesn't mean that person falls asleep at the wheel and doesn't play an active role in making decisions about what to do. When we spot an issue, we'll make a suggestion saying, hey, looks like there's language here that's not favorable to you. We suggest you delete it, and here's a practice note about why this matters. Or it looks like you're missing an important provision or an entire clause that should be there. Here's sample language to use to add that. And here's a practice note about why that point matters, what the standards are, maybe some edge cases to think about. On top of that, we then built out, using GPT in combination with that foundation, the ability to say, if you like our proposal, if you think you want to take action and make this change, click a button and we'll revise the contract for you. And what we've found is that using GPT off the shelf to do that was not very accurate. So if you were to copy and paste a clause from a contract, go into generic GPT, drop it and say, hey, revise this to accomplish this task that LegalOn told me to do, it's actually not going to be accurate, much more than 50% of the time. And for us, that didn't seem professional grade. That was not trustworthy. It was not authoritative. It was not so consistently reliable that it was going to save people time, much less give them confidence that the changes being made were accurate. It would add language in the wrong place. It would delete important language. It would add duplicative language that had already been covered. So all of those things that tell you that off the shelf, GPT doesn't fully understand the entire contract or even the specific clause without some supporting technology development and some supporting content. So that's what we ended up building around that, making sure that what we were feeding into GPT and guiding it and prompting it to do, and the technical specifications we were setting around it, all got us to a point where now when you click that button to make a change in the contract, it's going to be like walk away good. You're going to be stunned by how good it is 95% plus of the time. And so at that point, if you're making multiple changes to a contract, the time savings really add up. You can take a process, an issue spotting process that might have taken an hour, condense that down into 20 or 30 minutes, and now you can start making changes and revisions to that are trustworthy and accurate even faster, rather than having to type from scratch or go search your precedent database to find some appropriate language. So you now have much more at your fingertips to accelerate this process.
Daniel,
so that's kind of how we're seeing it and overcoming some of those limitations of what's off the shelf today.
Yeah, if I could just jump, it's kind of interesting as you were describing that. It is, and this is kind of about, is AI going to replace lawyers, or is it just helping them? Is it just something to make us more efficient, to maybe even take away tasks that we really don't want to be doing? It is this interesting kind of distinction that you painted there as I think about the pre and post signature world of contracts, because what you were just describing is, there's really a human is actively doing a thing and AI is helping you through kind of like, it's one document or one clause. You're in this process where you're like, I need to do this activity that's going to change this thing, and I want to do it faster and better. And the AI is going to assist me. Maybe it's going to get me to this place faster. It's going to give me some language that I can think of. The first thing I ever did with GPT was I needed to write this like very simple legal document in France. Because as you know, I spent a lot of time there, and it's been a long time since I thought in French contracting language. And I went into GPT and I was like, hey, do you speak French? And it replied with a oui. And then I said, do you speak legal French? And it wrote, this really basic one form contract. I still had to go in and change a lot of things, but like the amount of time it saved me from like trying to remember how to write in legal French and then sending it to a friend and asking them to read it. And I sent it off and it totally worked. And to me, that was just like the coolest thing, but that was a single document with a specific activity that I was, as a human, involved in the QC. And I think that's one of the things with post signature that can tend to be really different, because you don't want to QC 100,000 generated AI points in your database.
It's impossible. Yeah, all the time savings are lost at that point.
Everything's lost. So if you're just going at it in this kind of pure AI way, and you're like, oh, I'm just going to use this thing, and I know it's not perfect, but it's kind of good, but then I need to do something and I can't rely on it. And so that's really where, in Knowable, that's why, again, we're trying to do the work that attorneys really don't want to do. We want to QC all that data, make sure it's super pristine, so that when you do come in and you ask a question of your executed agreements, you can rely on kind of where you're finding, and then you can go do all the cool things you were just talking about. You can find that agreement, figure out if it needs to be changed. We had this one funny use case, and I know we're probably getting in time, so I'll kind of end with a word of caution maybe. But we had a client who had used something, and this is probably a little early generative AI kind of world, to generate a termination letter. And the termination letter, while its title was like termination letter terminating this amendment, the actual language in the agreement terminated the MSA. And it was totally unknowing to the client. So we had caught that and we were like, oh, this MSA has been terminated by this agreement. The client hadn't expected that or wanted that to be the case. But it was, just kind of generative, some sort of technology that hadn't necessarily been QC'd. And legal language, of course, is really specific. Luckily, these clients wanted to continue to work together. It wasn't a big issue, but that could be the kind of thing that becomes a really big issue if you're not QCing and involved in that process. And so I do think it's important for the folks listening. It's an exciting point in time for AI. And it's also still a very kind of cautionary point in time where you want to use it in the right places at the right times.
So just to put a point on that, I think it's in the questions, which is, so where exactly are you guys seeing human expertise become indispensable? And it depends a bit, it sounds like, on the level of accuracy that a customer expects in that post-signature phase, for example. Can you say a little bit more about that? Like where is the human role here?
Yeah, I think it's definitely on accuracy, but it's on like your use case and your needs, and then how much do you want to have to do yourself versus just allow something else to do for you. So I think when I think about wanting to go and find a contract or a certain kind of data point in my contracts, I definitely don't want to read every contract my company signed. I definitely want to not miss something that's really important. And so I kind of want really accurate data, and I don't want to have to be the one that created it. And I mean, even in our, Ravel days, Daniel, I remember there was at some point, when a sales contract was signed, had to be uploaded in Salesforce, and that data had to get into Salesforce. And, I'd love to say we had millions and millions of signed customer contracts, but it wasn't quite that many, like some of the clients that I work with today. But still, it was daunting. And the amount of data that was wrong in our Salesforce was like really, really frustrating. And it's like, how do you as a business leader make a decision when this data is being entered in a kind of, and it's not necessarily just haphazard or lazy. It's really hard as a human, to enter standardized data as metadata into a tool. And it's certainly hard for ML to get it right all the time. So I think one of the things I often try to think about is, how much does accuracy matter to you? Or is the thing that you're doing something that you have humans that are reviewing at the time of kind of inception? So like you said, if you're asking a tool to correct a paragraph and you're staring at that paragraph, you know that you're still in the loop and you can have a fair degree of confidence, and yeah, it's going to make you faster and better. But if you're going into a tool and you're just asking a question and you want it to give you something back, and you don't really have time to verify that, and you don't want to go through. So I think it's both, actually, as I say that, Daniel, I think it's accuracy, it's also scale. Are you asking the question of one little particular thing and you know where that is, or are you asking a question of a large collection and you need to find it, and you need to find it reliably?
Yeah, for sure. I think we see that definitely on the pre-signature side, which is you're not trying to evaluate a mountain at any given moment. You're dealing with one specific contract. You're in the loop at that moment in time. Any change, any issue spotting is very inspectable, right? It's just that unit that you're looking at saying, is this accurate? Is this helpful? What do I do with it? And so I think what we found is that, claims that AI is going to, 95% automate contract review, that doesn't feel accurate today, right? Like that doesn't feel realistic. What we see in customers report is 40% time savings on average. And that's pretty massive. That's meaningful, but there's still a human in that process making business judgments. And so I think that's where we're seeing this indispensable human role. Like there's judgment that's required about what do I bother negotiating? What's the best way to win that argument? What's the actual risk to my business in this particular situation? Where software can build a lot of support around that to make it go faster, but there is still an important role for that human. And even if you can imagine automating more and more of that, there's still going to be a human role in setting the rules for that, like still putting input, saying, hey, I actually can now set some guidance about the things that matter uniquely to my business, and software can do more of that review for me in the future. But you're still going to be a rule setter and a builder of that framework. So maybe at that point, let's pause there and ask Corey to jump in to help moderate some of the Q&A.
Absolutely. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Nick. And as folks have more questions over the next 10 minutes, please go ahead and type those in the Q&A. I'll kick off with an initial question. And I have some other questions, but yeah, please go ahead and type those questions as you have for your specific interests and needs. And so to start off, since we're talking about AI and we talked about how human in the loop is still necessary, how should legal teams make the business case for AI? Are there truly cost savings and time savings even when human in the loop is required?
You want to take that first, Nick?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. So I think one of the ways, I'm going to start with a negative. One of the ways not to make the business case for it is what one of the data scientists Dan and I used to work with calls AI sizzle. So if the only reason you're excited about AI is because it's exciting right now and it's in like all the journals and newspapers, that's probably the wrong reason to be looking for it. The way that I would really think about it is, again, what are the activities that are really valuable that you as a business are doing? And how might you do one of two things? There's kind of efficiency gains and cost savings in doing that. Those may result, I think everyone wants to know, like, does that mean I get headcount reduction on my team? Not necessarily. What we tend to find is that as you answer a first question more quickly, there's actually deeper questions that the company always wanted to answer that they never had the time to actually get to. So really, it's about like shifting value to the things that people care about a lot more, and potentially accelerating certain kind of things like time to close a contract, time to renegotiate a contract, or for your lawyer to turn it around. A lot of the complaints we often hear from salespeople, for example, are that, you've got this contract that came in, you send it to legal, and you're spending all this time waiting on legal to respond to that. And we all know there's a lot of exogenous risk in the world. So it may even be a deal that everyone wants to get done, but something happens in that time period. And there's a lot of risk that you just want to minimize there. So that's one thing I would think about. The other way to think about is, like, how do we make a business case for AI-based tool is just quite frankly, like not to say AI. So one is, do you need it? Two is, do you need to use the word AI? I think at the end of the pitch, if you make a really compelling business case for how a tool is going to help you achieve goals that you want to achieve, at the end say, and it's really cool because this is kind of using AI. And I think that's a win-win because, you'll probably be appreciated for finding out about new technology and wanting to use it. But at the same time, you brought it kind of realistically to something the company needs to do anyways.
Yeah, it's interesting, that point, just to pick it up. We do have a number of companies coming to us now saying, hey, we've started a new wave of software evaluation because we're so excited about the opportunities of what we think AI can do today. And I actually think that's a very healthy starting point. And what we then try to kind of tease out is, well, is like contract review, is this pre-signature review one of your top 3, top 4 problems? If so, great. Like that's going to be a priority. You guys are going to want to work on it. Let's solve that together. And at that point, let's look at the things that we typically see customers being able to build a business case around. It could be time, it could be risk, it could be efficiency, it could be team and business happiness, or it could be all 4 of those things, right? So time, it could be, how do I save time on doing these reviews so I have more time to do product counseling or regulatory work? How do I do faster turnaround so the business gets, a contract reviewed in 24 hours instead of 5 days? How do I do higher quality reviews? How do I make sure that we're catching all of the issues and not having sort of ticking time bombs that lurk within our contracts? How do I do this consistently so that somebody who just joined the team can get onboarded really quickly and do a great job on contracts that they're less familiar with, or handle contracts that were outside of their initial training? How do they go from handling NDAs to DPAs to SaaS agreements? How do you do more with less? Like we are folks saying, if I could do more with software, that means I don't need to expand my team with another headcount for another 6 months, or it means I might get to bring on somebody and cross-train them so that they're going to contribute in multiple ways. And then, lastly, on this happiness piece, how do I make sure that like the business is never complaining that something's stuck in legal? How do I make sure that folks on my legal team aren't stuck doing, contract review after contract review for the next 3 years and are able to develop their skills and start contributing in other ways? And so I think like through those different combinations of things, there's a 1,000,001 different ways to build a business case that has hard savings, saying, hey, look, software is going to help us be faster. It might be through contributing more. It might be through better turnaround times, as well as some qualitative savings around never being stuck in legal, making the business happier, skill development. So, I think once folks start to dig in and say, hey, here's why this is a top 3 problem for me. The pain point I'm trying to solve is around time or risk or efficiency, or all 3 of those. It becomes pretty easy to put on paper like real ROI that can pay off pretty quickly.
Just to jump in on that last note on ROI. So we actually develop, because we get this question, and Corey, this is a question we get a lot from our clients, is like, how do we justify the ROI internally? Like we know it, we can feel it, but like we need to make a really quantitative argument. We have a team at Knowable that works directly with our clients to help them like put together the ROI calculator, and we do it in a mix of different ways. But we do think it's there's so many different angles that you can come at it from, and just kind of like really crystallizing that and justifying it to whoever it is that you need to make the argument to. It does become super important, but it's really, really quite doable.
Another question that's come up is, how do these AI systems deal with confidentiality in contracts?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that we think about a lot because security is really top of mind in handling contracts on behalf of customers. So there's one that's sort of just like general software hygiene, right? How do you securely encrypt contracts? How do you store them safely? How do you make sure that there's proper access controls to anything that the company has on our own servers or through our, the vendors that we use like AWS and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure? Within GPT, I know this has been kind of a question that folks have. What happens, if some piece of text or a contract is getting sent to GPT? Is it being used to train a model? Is it potentially, is a snippet of that going to show up for somebody else's answer in the future? What we've been able to do, and this is kind of part of making GPT professional grade, is we use GPT through Microsoft Azure. So it's not directly through OpenAI, it's through Microsoft. And in our relationship with Microsoft, we've secured kind of the highest level of data security and privacy protection. So no snippets that we send to Microsoft are ever used in training any other model. The snippets are not even stored on Microsoft. They're immediately essentially gone and deleted. Whereas traditionally, if you're using GPT off the shelf, those two things are not true. If you're using GPT off the shelf, it might be going to train a model, and the data might be getting stored for some period of time for GPT or Microsoft to do error analysis or overwatch to make sure that there's not kind of violations taking place of use of the system. But at the sort of professional grade level, we're able to secure both of those things, which I think should very squarely address people's concerns with how that data is being handled.
Yeah, and I think everything you said is true, Daniel. And a couple of things I would add is both like things to watch out for as you're talking to different vendors and maybe using some of these technologies yourself. So at Knowable right now, we're multi-model. So what that means is we work with lots of different machine learning models, whether a GPT or something like an Anthropic that is kind of a company that spun out of OpenAI a while ago, but really targeted on like this kind of IP as like a very big differentiator, and then a lot of different models. Google's BERT, for example, we use a whole bunch of different models because different models do things well in different circumstances. I think that's an important thing to know. Each model kind of has its best application, and you can use them more intelligently or less based on what you're trying to do. But the privacy thing is important in a couple of realms. So one, like Daniel said, if you're using OpenAI, these ChatGPT in the web, you are training the foundation model as you're putting things in there. So potentially what you're getting could get out to the masses. The issues with GPT on like Azure is that today, at least, we don't get to train specifically that Azure-based model like we would with older machine learning models that we're hosting locally. And so I would just note that like there are trade-offs in everything in life. Like you want to be training and kind of controlling the training that's going into a model, and you also want to have a lot of confidence in IP protection. This field is evolving every single day, and we're getting better and better at it. And I think we'll see a lot of new advancements in just the next 6 months. But as somebody buying, a tool like this, I would actually ask those questions. I would say, what model are you using? Where is it being hosted? How can you ensure data privacy if I'm using your tool? And I think not enough people are asking those questions right now.
Looks like we're close to time. So I think we have time for one more question. How can we beat skepticism around new legal technologies?
I think folks might be skeptical for a variety of reasons. One might be they've heard claims of disruptive innovation or AI a lot over the last 10 years. And they might have tried stuff that didn't live up to the hype or sort of underwhelmed them, didn't match their high expectations. So I think that's one potential issue. Folks who have been trying this stuff again and again over the years might feel a little bit burned by hype. That said, I think the best way to evaluate these things is to try them. It's the proof is in the pudding. Ultimately, we've talked a lot about how these things get made and some of the strengths and weaknesses, but ultimately their job is to help humans perform tasks. And they can either do that or they can't. And after you've begun using these tools and they're working for you, how they actually work sort of disappears into the background. And ultimately the test is this thing doing what you want, doing it sufficiently well that it's adding value to you. So, what we really try to encourage folks to do is get in front of it, like see a demo, try it out for yourself, versus stay on the sidelines and sort of don't take what's written in kind of general media publications or general coverage of the space to apply to any particular tool. Like the variations between different companies and different products and how these things work depends a lot on like the actual implementation and the design around it and the care and the attention that went into training these models and the levels of accuracy and quality that each company seeks and strives for. So I think it's very hard to paint with a broad brush, and the best way to evaluate it is to get in and actually evaluate it.
Yeah, this is not blockchain for law right now all over again with large language models. I think it's really important that everybody knows that blockchain was the wrong tool for the legal market, and the hype there was kind of ill manifested. The law is a language. Large language models are good at language. Hence, they're going to be good at helping us do things in law. And I think just the last note I would build on what Daniel said is, there's going to be lots of tools doing different things, and just use them in the right way. And so if you think back to some of the examples we gave, if you're doing a project and it's really short-term duration and you can accept a certain amount of risk, maybe pure machine learning is helpful for that project. If you're reviewing a contract and you want to go through it faster, but you're still going to put your eyes on that contract, machine learning is going to help you do it a lot more quickly. If you're going into a thing that you need absolutely reliable data and you're betting the farm on it, or you're using it time and time again, you probably want something that's AI with human quality control built into the process. So these are all reasonable applications of AI for kind of everyday legal use and purposes. And it's just making sure that you're kind of using the right tool for the right problem to help you solve it better.
Great. Looks like we're near time. If you want to sort of end things, Daniel and Nicholas.
Sounds good. I think that is a good place to end it. So thanks everybody for joining us. Appreciate your time and attention and great questions. And appreciate Nick for joining us here for this great conversation.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thanks everyone. Good to talk with you, Daniel. Always.
Thanks all. Bye.